Have you ever noticed a strange pattern in your love life? That no matter how much you swear you'll choose differently this time, that you'll flee from toxic relationships, you always end up attracted to the same people who hurt you in the same way? What if I told you that the person who attracts you most is precisely who will hurt you most? What if what you call irresistible chemistry is actually your trauma trying to repeat itself through a romantic disguise? This will sound brutal, but it's the truth. You don't fall in love with who will make you happy. You fall in love with who triggers your deepest wounds. Why do we feel magnetically attracted to people who seem tailor-made to destroy us emotionally? Why does that partner who ignores you generate more desire than the one who treats you well? Why do you feel more alive in relationships that make you suffer than in those that offer you peace? The answer will shock you because it reveals that what you call love might actually be trauma addiction disguised as passion. And today, using the revolutionary discoveries of Harville Hendrix, creator of Imago Therapy and one of the world's greatest specialists in unconscious relationships, along with insights from other giants like Bowlby and Carl Jung, we're going to unmask the psychological mechanism that keeps you trapped in destructive relational cycles. Prepare to discover why your unconscious mind chooses partners who guarantee you'll relive your worst emotional experiences, and how to break this pattern once and for all. The emotional conditioning you don't see. Have you ever caught yourself in a relationship that felt too familiar? Even though the scenario was different, the script was always the same. You giving too much, nullifying yourself, waiting for crumbs of attention, feeling like you were never enough. And in the end, you always ended up in the same place, exhausted, hurt, questioning your own worth. You promised yourself you wouldn't fall for this again, but you did. Again and again. Let me explain something that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. This isn't stupidity. It's not weakness. It's not lack of self-esteem. It's unconscious. You're being controlled by neurological patterns engraved in your mind during the first years of life, patterns that operate completely outside your consciousness. Harville Hendrix, psychologist and creator of the revolutionary Imago Therapy, spent decades studying this dynamic. His discovery was devastating. We are attracted to people who possess the positive and negative qualities of those who raised us. Romantic love is in reality the unconscious search for healing childhood wounds. Translating in brutally direct terms, you fall in love with who triggers your pain, because your unconscious believes that if you can be loved by this person, you'll finally be cured of the wounds your primary caregivers created. But this rarely happens. Instead of healing, you relive the trauma. Instead of finally being seen and valued, you become invisible again. And with each repetition, your self-esteem bleeds a little more. Hendrix identified that we unconsciously choose partners who remind us of our primary caregivers, especially in what hurt us. The word imago comes from Latin and means image, referring to the unconscious image of familial love we've carried since childhood. Just like Neo had to choose between the blue pill and the red pill, you now have two options. Blue pill. Close this video now and return to your life believing you're unlucky in love, or that all people are the same. Continue repeating the same toxic patterns and blaming others for your failed relationships. Red pill. Continue in this video until the end and discover how your unconscious is sabotaging your relationships through a psychological mechanism you don't even imagine exists, and how to reprogram this dynamic forever. Spoiler alert. It might be painful to discover you're being manipulated by your own unconscious mind, but it will be liberating when you finally manage to choose partners consciously instead of being controlled by unresolved wounds. Only subscribe to the channel if you're willing to face uncomfortable truths about your romantic patterns to build truly healthy relationships. Because what I'm going to reveal now will completely change how you understand attraction, passion, and love. The neuroscience behind romantic compulsion. Do you know that feeling of butterflies in your stomach when you see someone who attracts you intensely? Our culture romanticizes this as love at first sight or irresistible chemistry. But neurologically, this sensation is indistinguishable from anxiety. And there's a disturbing evolutionary reason for this. Bowlby, British psychiatrist and creator of attachment theory, was one of the first to identify that our adult attraction patterns are programmed during the first years of life. Through his research on orphaned children after World War II, Bowlby discovered that attachment behavior is an evolutionary survival strategy, and that this programming remains active in adult life. But here's the part that will make you rethink all your relationships. Your unconscious brain doesn't distinguish between familiar and healthy. It only seeks what is known, even if this known is dysfunctional. Hendrix observed that our primitive brain has a non-negotiable impulse to restore the feeling of vitality and integrity with which we came into the world. To do this, it must repair the damage caused in childhood as a result of unmet needs. And the way it tries to make this repair is by finding a partner who can give us what our caregivers failed to provide. You'd think this would lead us to choose someone who has what our caregivers didn't have, right? If our parents were cold, we'd choose someone warm. If they were critical, we'd choose someone understanding. But that's not what happens. Your unconscious functions through what Hendrix calls imago, a composite image of the positive and negative characteristics of your primary caregivers. You feel attracted to people who carry both the aspects you adored and those that hurt you. Why? Because your primitive brain believes that if you can be loved by someone who has the same characteristics that rejected you in childhood, it means you finally deserved love. It's a desperate attempt to rewrite history. Carl Jung had already identified something similar through his concept of complexes. Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves, because we frequently project our own unresolved aspects onto others. Mary Ainsworth, Bowlby's collaborator, identified through the famous strange situation experiment that there are different attachment styles that develop in childhood: secure, anxious, preoccupied, avoidant, dismissive, and disorganized. And here's the crucial point. These attachment styles become your attraction patterns in adult life. If you developed an anxious, preoccupied attachment in childhood because your caregivers were inconsistent, you'll feel attracted to partners who are emotionally unavailable or unpredictable. The anxiety this generates is interpreted by your nervous system as passion or romantic intensity. If you developed an avoidant, dismissive style because your caregivers were cold or rejecting, you'll feel attracted to partners who also avoid emotional intimacy. You create a choreographed dance of proximity and distancing that keeps both of you safe from true vulnerability. And if you developed a disorganized pattern, common in families with trauma, addiction, or abuse, you might feel attracted to partners who alternate between extremes, sometimes intensely loving, sometimes cruelly rejecting. The most disturbing thing is that this attraction happens completely outside your consciousness. You might be convinced you're choosing someone totally different from your parents, but your unconscious detects subtle patterns of energy, body language, and emotional dynamics that recreate exactly the same primary wound. The society that encourages romantic trauma. We live in a culture that doesn't just tolerate toxic relational patterns, it glamorizes them. Movies, songs, books, and social media consistently sell the same destructive narrative. Real love is intense, dramatic, obsessive, and painful. If it doesn't hurt, it's not love has become the unofficial mantra of an entire generation. Jealousy is romanticized as passion. Possessiveness is called protection. Emotional dependency is sold as soulmates. Zygmunt Bauman, in his analysis of liquid love, observed that modern society has transformed relationships into fast consumption products. But there's something even more sinister happening. We're being conditioned to prefer drama to peace, intensity to stability, the familiar toxic to the healthy unknown. Think about your own experiences when you were in a truly healthy relationship where the person treated you well, was consistent, respectful, and emotionally available. Did you feel bored, like something was missing? And when you were with someone who ignored you, was unpredictable, or made you question your own worth, did you feel more alive, more passionate, more obsessed? This isn't love. It's trauma addiction. Hendrix observed that we live in cycles of traumatic matches where what attracts us is what makes us sick. Society doesn't teach us to love. It teaches us to desire, to consume, to hope that the other will save us from something we can't even name. Dating apps have intensified this pattern by transforming people into profiles optimized to trigger our unconscious triggers: a photo, a bio, some messages, and your primitive brain is already projecting all your unresolved wounds onto this person. The swipe has become a digital form of seeking partners who activate our specific neurotic patterns. And when we find someone who activates our primary wound, we interpret the resulting anxiety as special connection or destiny. Meanwhile, genuinely healthy people, those who would offer us peace, stability, and mature love, go unnoticed because they don't activate our internal alarm systems. They seem boring or without chemistry to us because they're not recreating our familiar trauma. Jung had already warned about this by observing that people will do anything, however absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. We prefer the familiarity of known suffering to the uncertainty of true growth. Meanwhile, we keep trying to fix our history through relationships that only reinforce the same pain, believing that this time it will be different, that this time we'll manage to make that person love us the way we always wanted to be loved. The psychological mechanism that controls your choices. Now, let's get to the core of the problem. How exactly your unconscious sabotages your romantic choices without you realizing it. Hendrix discovered that we all carry what he calls imago, an unconscious image composed of traits from all our primary caregivers. This image isn't just visual, it includes energy patterns, communication styles, ways of expressing or not expressing affection, and mainly the specific wounds these people created in you. We are literally programmed to feel attraction to people who activate our unresolved wounds, explains Hendrix. It's as if our unconscious mind believed that if we could be loved by someone who hurts us in the same way we were hurt in childhood, this would prove we're worthy of love. But there are even deeper layers to this mechanism. John Bowlby identified that we develop internal working models, mental representations of how relationships work based on our earliest experiences. These models include beliefs about whether you're worthy of love, whether others are trustworthy and emotionally available, what kind of behavior is necessary to maintain relationships, what constitutes normal love. If your primary caregivers were critical, you developed an internal model that equates love with criticism. When someone criticizes you, your unconscious mind interprets this as this person cares about me, even though consciously you hate being criticized. If your caregivers were emotionally unavailable, you developed a model that equates love with scarcity. When someone gives you attention easily, your unconscious interprets it as this can't be real love, because real love in your internal model is something you need to fight to get. If your caregivers alternated between affection and rejection, you developed a model that equates love with anxiety. The emotional roller coaster becomes your definition of passion. Jung deepened this understanding through his concept of projection. He observed that we project our unconscious contents onto others, especially people we feel attracted to. You don't fall in love with the real person, you fall in love with your own wounds projected onto them. Here's a concrete example of how this works. Let's say your father was emotionally distant and critical, but occasionally showed approval when you performed well. Your mother was affectionate but inconsistent, sometimes overprotective, sometimes absent. Your imago will be composed of someone emotionally unavailable who offers conditional approval, plus someone affectionate but inconsistent. In adult life, you'll feel magnetically attracted to people who combine these characteristics. Maybe a partner who is charming and affectionate at first but then becomes critical and distant, or someone who alternates between idolizing you and ignoring you. When you meet this person, your nervous system fires recognition signals. Your unconscious mind whispers, "This is the person who can heal me," but in reality, it's the person who will recreate exactly the same dynamics that originally hurt you. And here's the cruelest part. The more the person recreates your original wound, the more in love you feel. Familiar pain is interpreted as emotional depth. Anxiety is confused with passion. Bowlby observed that our adult attachment behavior is an attempt to recreate the security we lost or never had in childhood. But since our internal models were formed in dysfunctional contexts, we try to recreate security through dynamics that guarantee insecurity. It's a devastatingly perfect psychological loop. The illusion of romantic love is healing. There's something even deeper operating behind this compulsion for partners who activate our wounds. The unconscious fantasy that romantic love can undo past traumas. Hendrix identified that we enter romantic relationships with an unconscious agenda. If I can make this person love me, this person who has the same characteristics as those who hurt me, it will mean I've overcome my original wound. It's an unconscious logic that seems to make sense. If your father was cold and critical, and you can make a cold and critical partner love you unconditionally, this will prove you're worthy of love. If your mother was inconsistent and unpredictable, and you can make an inconsistent partner be totally devoted to you, this will heal your abandonment wound. But this logic is fundamentally flawed. Carl Jung observed that everything that doesn't come to consciousness returns as destiny. If your wounds remain unconscious, you'll be compelled to reenact them repeatedly through relationships that recreate exactly the same dynamics. What happens in practice is even crueler. The more you try to make this person love you, the more you behave in ways that drive away true love. If your wound is criticism, you might become defensive or perfectionist, creating more reasons for criticism. If your wound is abandonment, you might become possessive or needy, creating more reasons for the person to pull away. If your wound is rejection, you might become submissive or self-nullifying, losing exactly the qualities that could generate genuine respect and attraction. Hendrix called this the symbiotic wound, the idea that you need another person to feel complete. But paradoxically, the more you need someone to feel whole, the less attractive you become to emotionally healthy people. Bowlby observed something similar when studying attachment patterns. Children with anxious attachment frequently develop behaviors that increase the likelihood of rejection, a pattern that continues in adult life. You become prisoner to a dynamic where, 1. You feel attracted to people who activate your wound. 2. Your activated wound makes you act in ways that guarantee rejection. 3. The rejection confirms your original wound. 4. You feel attracted to more people who activate the same wound. It's a self-perpetuating cycle, and each repetition deepens the neural pattern. Jung had an even more radical perspective on this. He believed that romantic relationships based on unresolved wounds weren't just dysfunctional, they were a form of avoiding real growth. The encounter with ourselves is one of the most unpleasant experiences we avoid by projecting everything negative in our surroundings, wrote Jung. Trauma-based relationships are a sophisticated way of avoiding doing the internal work necessary to heal these wounds. While you're obsessed with making someone love you, you avoid having to learn to love yourself. While you're trying to heal your wound through another person, you avoid taking responsibility for your own healing. And this is perhaps the most painful realization. Toxic relationships aren't just symptoms of unresolved wounds. They're escape mechanisms disguised as the search for love. The moment of rupture and awakening. But now we come to the most painful and most liberating turning point of this journey. You're not being punished by the universe. You're not unlucky in love. You're not destined to suffer in relationships. You're being called to consciousness. The repetition of the pattern isn't a cosmic mistake. It's an invitation. Your unconscious is trying to complete a cycle, not so you'll suffer again, but so that, this time, you'll choose differently. Hendrix had a revolutionary insight. Conscious relationships aren't magical. They're painful at first because they force you out of the script, but they're the only real path to breaking the pattern. But for this, you need to do what has never been done before. See the wound, name it, embrace it, and stop projecting it onto the other. Jung called this making the unconscious conscious. When you can identify exactly which specific wound is being activated, you gain the power to choose consciously instead of being controlled unconsciously. Bowlby observed that the ability to form secure relationships in adult life depends on developing awareness about our own attachment patterns. This means recognizing what type of behavior from others activates your wound, how you react when your wound is activated, what narratives you create to justify staying in toxic dynamics, what physical and emotional signals indicate you're being controlled by the wound instead of acting consciously. But there's something even deeper happening in this awakening process. When you stop trying to heal your wound through other people and take responsibility for your own healing, something extraordinary happens. You stop being attracted to people who activate your trauma. It's not that you logically decide to avoid these people, they simply stop generating that irresistible chemistry. Your healed wound no longer vibrates at the same frequency as toxic dynamics. And simultaneously, you begin to feel attracted to people you previously considered boring, people who offer stability, consistency, mutual respect, and growth. Hendrix discovered that when two people do the work of healing their own wounds, they can create relationships that are not only healthy, but serve as catalysts for mutual growth. But this process requires something our culture doesn't teach: the courage to stay alone long enough to do the internal work. Jung was categorical about this. Solitude is to the mind what fasting is to the body, painful but purifying. You need to break the addiction to relationships before you can create truly chosen relationships. This means stopping using romance as escape from your own company. It means stopping seeking external validation for wounds only you can heal. It means accepting that no person in the world can give you what you're not willing to give yourself. The science of relational transformation. Now let's get to the practical aspect: how exactly you reprogram neurological patterns that have been engraved for decades. Hendrix developed what he calls Imago dialogue, a specific methodology for identifying and transforming unconscious relational patterns. The process begins with a devastatingly simple question: what specific characteristics of your primary caregivers do you recognize in partners you feel intensely attracted to? Most people initially resist this connection. My boyfriend is nothing like my father. But when you analyze energy patterns, communication styles, and emotional dynamics, the similarities become hauntingly clear. The second step is identifying your primary wound, the specific need that wasn't met in childhood. Hendrix identified several main categories. The wound of invisibility: if you weren't truly seen or understood, you'll feel attracted to partners who are distracted, absent, or incapable of seeing you deeply. The wound of criticism: if you were constantly criticized or judged, you'll feel attracted to partners who are critical, perfectionist, or emotionally unavailable. The wound of abandonment: if you experience inconsistency or abandonment, you'll feel attracted to partners who are unpredictable, evasive, or incapable of commitment. The wound of suffocation: if you were overprotected or controlled, you'll feel attracted to partners who are possessive, controlling, or who invade your boundaries. The wound of rejection: if you were rejected or not accepted as you were, you'll feel attracted to partners who are rejecting, distant, or who make you feel you're not enough. John Bowlby complemented this understanding by showing that each wound creates a specific internal working model, a set of unconscious beliefs about how relationships work. For example, if your primary wound is abandonment, your internal model might include beliefs like, people will always leave me, I need to be perfect to deserve love. If I open up completely, I'll be rejected. Real love is scarce and needs to be conquered through suffering. These beliefs operate as unconscious filters that determine who you feel attracted to and how you interpret others' behaviors. Carl Jung observed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The transformation work involves literally reprogramming these internal models through deliberate consciousness. Hendrix developed specific exercises for this. 1. Imago mapping. Create a detailed list of positive and negative characteristics of all your primary caregivers. Then identify how these characteristics appear in partners you feel attracted to. 2. Trigger identification. Recognize what specific behaviors from others activate your wound and how you typically react when this happens. 3. Wound ownership. Accept that your wound is your responsibility to heal, not the partner's responsibility to avoid activating. 4. Conscious communication. Learn to communicate your needs without projecting your wound onto the other or trying to control their behavior. Bowlby emphasized that the ability to form secure relationships requires developing a new internal model based on corrective experiences. This means deliberately seeking experiences that contradict your limiting beliefs about relationships. But there's an even deeper aspect to this transformation process: the revolution of conscious choice. When you finally break the unconscious patterns that control your romantic choices, something extraordinary happens. You become free to love instead of being compelled to need. Hendrix observed that Mature relationships are those where two people consciously choose to create something together, instead of using each other to avoid loneliness or heal wounds. But reaching this level of relational maturity requires a complete internal revolution. First, you must accept a brutal truth. While your wounds remain unhealed, you can't truly love, you can only neurotically need. Jung was categorical about this. Relationship doesn't happen between unconscious people. That would be simple sleepwalking. Conscious love is only possible when you've developed a mature relationship with yourself. This means knowing your wounds intimately but not being controlled by them. When you know exactly what behaviors from others activate your insecurity, you can choose how to respond instead of reacting automatically, taking total responsibility for your emotional happiness. You stop expecting the partner to heal your wounds or avoid activating them. You accept that your emotional stability is your exclusive responsibility. Developing the capacity to be genuinely alone. As Hendrix observed, the ability to be alone is the foundation of the ability to be truly present with another. Bowlby identified that people with secure attachment develop what he called an internal secure base, a capacity for emotional self-regulation that doesn't depend on the presence or behavior of others. When you develop this internal secure base, your romantic choices transform radically. Instead of feeling attracted to people who activate your wound, you feel attracted to people who complement your wholeness. Instead of seeking someone to complete you, you look for someone with whom you can create something greater than both of you individually. Jung called this a relationship between individuated people, people who have done the work of knowing themselves deeply and taking responsibility for their own psychological integrity. But there's something even deeper in this transformation. When you stop projecting your wounds onto others, you finally manage to see people as they really are. Hendrix observed that most relational conflicts are actually conflicts between what the person is and what we project they should be. When your projections cease, artificial drama disappears and relationships become about real mutual growth. This doesn't mean conscious relationships are without challenges. It means the challenges become opportunities for growth instead of reenactments of past traumas. When two consciously healed people meet, they can create what Hendrix calls a conscious relationship, a partnership where both commit to using their mutual triggers as catalysts for healing and evolution. But we now come to the most important moment of this journey, the choice that will determine the rest of your love life, the moment of definitive decision. So here we are, at the moment that defines everything. Now you know the truth. You have been unconsciously attracted to people who recreate your childhood wounds. You understand that what you call passion is often just familiar trauma disguised as romance. You comprehend that while your wounds remain unconscious, you'll be compelled to repeat the same destructive patterns indefinitely. You have two options before you. First, close this video, return to your normal life and continue pursuing relationships based on unresolved wounds. Continue interpreting anxiety as passion, drama as depth, and neurotic need as love. Continue blaming your partners for patterns you unconsciously choose. This is the easier option in the short term, and it's the option 99% of people choose. Second, accept that you need to do the hardest work of your life, heal your primary wounds, and develop the capacity to love consciously instead of needing neurotically. Accept that this means periods of solitude while you reprogram patterns that were engraved over decades. But also accept that it's the only way to experience relationships that nourish your soul instead of draining your energy. Hendrix knew most people would choose the first option. He observed that the transformation of relationships doesn't happen easily or quickly. We're embarking on a lifelong journey, but recognized that few have courage for this journey. Bowlby was even more direct. The main task in a person's life is to give birth to themselves and become what they potentially are. But this requires facing aspects of yourself you've been avoiding your entire life. Jung offered perhaps the most honest perspective. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you truly are. The goal is to make the unconscious conscious. But he also knew most people prefer the familiarity of known suffering to the uncertainty of true growth. So I asked directly, looking into your eyes, are you ready to accept that your unresolved wounds have been controlling your romantic choices? Are you willing to do the internal work necessary to heal these wounds, even if it means being alone while you develop an internal secure base? Do you have the courage to give up the addictive intensity of trauma-based relationships in favor of the deep peace of relationships based on conscious choice? If your answer is yes, then you're ready for the most important journey of your life. If your answer is no, that's fine. At least now you know you're consciously choosing to remain in the patterns. But if your answer is, I don't know, but I want to find out, then you've already taken the first step, the patrol for breaking toxic patterns. If you've made it this far, it's because something fundamental has changed inside you. You can no longer pretend you don't know why you repeat the same relational patterns. You can no longer blame others for the dynamics you unconsciously choose. So let me give you a practical protocol to start this transformation today. First step, mapping your imago. Make a detailed list of all your primary caregivers, parents, grandparents, older siblings, anyone who had a significant parental role. For each person, list 5 positive characteristics, 5 negative characteristics. How this person expressed or didn't express love. How this person reacted when you needed something. What specific wound this person created in you. Then analyze your last 3-5 romantic relationships and identify which characteristics of your imago each partner possessed. Second step, identifying your primary wound using the categories Hendrix identified. Determine what your main wound is: invisibility, criticism, abandonment, suffocation, or rejection. Write in detail how this wound manifests in relationships, what behaviors from others activate this wound, how you typically react when the wound is activated, what narratives you create to justify staying in dynamics that activate this wound. Third step, developing body awareness. Learn to recognize in your body when your wound is being activated. Unresolved wounds always generate specific physical sensations: chest tightness, throat knots, shoulder tension, stomach anxiety. Practice observing these sensations without immediately reacting or trying to make the other stop activating your wound. Fourth step, total ownership. Accept that your wound is your responsibility to heal, not others' responsibility to avoid activating. This means stopping trying to control others' behavior and focusing exclusively on how you respond when triggered. Fifth step, conscious solitude. Practice dedicate at least 30 days without seeking any type of romantic or sexual validation. Use this time to develop a rich relationship with yourself, without external distractions. Jung observed that solitude is necessary to give us the opportunity to discover we're not alone. You need to break the addiction to external connection before you can create authentic connections. Sixth step, reprogramming through corrective experiences. Deliberately seek relationships, romantic or not, that contradict your limiting beliefs about how relationships work. If your wound is abandonment, practice being with consistent and trustworthy people. If your wound is criticism, practice being with people who accept you unconditionally. Seventh step, developing conscious communication. Learn to communicate your needs without projecting your wound onto the other. Instead of, you never give me attention, rejection. Practice, I feel insecure when I don't receive confirmation of your presence. This comes from my abandonment wound, not necessarily from your behavior. Ownership. Hendrix emphasized that conscious relationships require communication that honors both your needs and the other's autonomy. Your declaration of emotional independence, if you've made it this far, it's because something deep has awakened inside you. You can no longer live unconsciously being controlled by wounds that were created decades ago. You can no longer interpret trauma as passion or neurotic need as love. Now you have a choice to make, a choice that will determine not only the quality of your future relationships, but the quality of your life as a whole. Will you continue being an emotional slave to unresolved wounds, or will you take total responsibility for your healing and transformation? Will you continue repeating the same patterns and expecting different results, or will you have the courage to do the internal work necessary to attract and maintain truly healthy relationships? So tell me in the comments, are you ready to break the cycle and choose consciously instead of being controlled unconsciously? Choose one of these phrases and write in the comments to declare your intention. I take total responsibility for my wounds and my healing. I choose to attract conscious love instead of familiar trauma. I prefer conscious solitude to unconscious relationships. And remember, the next video in this series will explore the even deeper territory of attachment bonds and how the fear of rejection programs our romantic behaviors from childhood, because understanding why you repeat toxic patterns is just the first step. The second step is discovering how the primordial fear of rejection controls every move you make in relationships, and how to transcend this fear to create bonds based on freedom instead of need. See you there, and congratulations for having the courage to look at truths most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You will never be controlled the same way again. True emotional freedom begins now.